Welcome to Films and Stuff with your hosts, Pete Mitchell and Ethan Hunt.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Films and Stuff. I'm Ethan, joined by the MVP, Most Valuable Pete. Hey, Pete, what's up today?
Not much, buddy. How are you?
I am great. It is Saturday morning, and as we have done nearly every Saturday morning, Saturday mornings mean it is the weekly stream or skip segment. I introduce it, and then I step aside, and you graciously remind the listeners what is, instead of rules, let's call it, what is the framework for the stream or skip segment?
All right. So, Ethan and I have prepared lists of TV shows for each other to watch. Every week, we randomly assign one of those shows. We watch 2 episodes if it's a series, 30 minutes if it's a feature-length program, and on that basis, we determine if that show is worthy of being streamed or skipped.
This week, you had assigned me something on Netflix, which I had seen on my feed. I never had the motivation to watch it, and it is a 6-episode series named Legends. It is described as a British crime thriller, and the reason that I never really wanted to get into it is that the cover art doesn't really capture me or capture my imagination. It's a little bit dour. It looks very much like a kind of crime procedural. Everyone's got kind of grim faces on or skulls and arms crossed, you know, kind of like the old typical detective type stuff. So I never really thought that I would want to watch this. So I'm glad that you gave me the push and kind of forced me to do so for Stream or Skip. And I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised. This takes place in England, London, in somewhere kind of like the early 1990s. It's Margaret Thatcher type era of being the prime minister, right? So that's kind of early 1990s, right? And the context is the proliferation of heroin and kind of like other narcotics. And compared to kind of the U.S. at this time, the president was Ronald Reagan. And remember, Ronald Reagan and his wife Nancy kind of famously declared the war on drugs, right?
Yeah.
So London, or Britain, we should say, kind of had a similar increase in the trafficking of narcotics. And therefore, the prime minister kind of announced this new, again, their own kind of like war on drugs. And, you know, they made it very public that they're going to go after this. And if you're a drug dealer, you're going to be caught. You're going to be incarcerated. There's going to be stiffer sentences, so on and so on and so forth. So they made a big PR point of highlighting this. But then on the government side, it was kind of, okay, guys, we don't actually have any more budget. We're not giving you any more resources, but you're expected to now find a way to curb the importation of drugs. And it was explicitly put on the, I guess it would be like the Customs and Excise Department. They were responsible for this. And the beginning of the show basically shows kind of like this political maneuvering or pressure saying, this is your responsibility now. You need to dramatically curb, you know, the importation of drugs into the UK. And if you can't do it, then basically we'll strip down customs and we'll give it to someone else. So there's kind of like an implied threat that the guy's or the minister's job was on the line if he didn't find a way to do it. And he said, okay, I can do it. I need all this money and resources and hiring and, you know, night vision goggles and the whole thing. And they said, nope, you've got absolutely no more budget, no more resources. You've just got to do it. But what we can tell you is that we'll kind of look the other way. So you're able to get like more aggressive and kind of like get into those gray areas, but we're not giving you more money. They're like, don't tell us how you did it, but you've got like free reign. So the guy makes this big to-do where he talks to kind of like his senior staff and says, here's the deal. We got to curb the importation of drugs. We don't have any more resources. But basically, we've got free reign and we can get into a gray area. We can do whatever we want. We've got 20,000 people that work for us. There must be 4 or 5 people who are really good that we can kind of put undercover or task for this special force. So the beginning of the show kind of finds, who are these really high performing customs agents that are a little bit, let's say, unchallenged or disaffected by their job. But for one reason or another, they're capable of much, much, much more, right? So for the first episode, we kind of follow these 4 or 5 people, get to know a little bit about their backstory, try to introduce them to us and make us feel like some type of connection, because obviously they're going to be introduced as the task force. What they originally do is they kind of just generically post on bulletin boards and stuff like, hey, if you want a new opportunity, show up for a meeting at this time. So a bunch of people show up for the meeting. And they say, look, there's a new task force. We can't tell you what it does, but we can tell you that you're going to be offsite training for like 2 months. You can't tell your friends or family, and we're not going to tell you anything about where or when or how until you get there. If you're interested, show up for the bus tomorrow. And then everybody, like a few people have a question, and then the guy's like, well, if you've asked a question, please leave the room. You're not right for this project. So they just kind of show like they're being badasses right away. Anyway, they whittle it down to 4 people. The 4 people go undercover. That's kind of where the first 2 episodes lead, is that they're kind of broken down into 2 teams of 2. The 5th person is kind of like running logistics, which means she's getting, fake driving license and setting up like a dummy company and, getting an apartment rented, like kind of all the logistics to give these people their fake IDs and stuff. And the reason that it's called Legends is that when you go undercover, at least in the UK, like you're living the life of like your legend, not like legendary that you would think about it, maybe from like an American perspective, but from like a British English language perspective, that you're operating under the name of your legend. So that's why it's called Legends, which I think is...
I see. Okay, so it's like your nom de
alter
plume,
ego.
Right? Like your fake name. Yeah.
Yes. So that's why it's called Legends. There's a few things to say about it. It's a little bit interesting, I have to say. I mean, if you kind of like the undercover, Breaking Bad, spy mission, night agent, right? That's another example of something like this. This is probably a show for you because it's kind of interesting. And again, this is taking place in the 1990s. So not everything is all about iPhone and Googling and stuff like that. It's a little bit more gritty and less technology intensive. It follows 5 people, but again, they're split up in 2 groups. So 2 of them are like, I'm going to butcher the geography here, but let's call them 2 are in kind of Liverpool-ish area. There's a big port in Liverpool, right?
Yep.
And 2 of them are like kind of like center London. And then the one is kind of like running logistics. So she kind of talks to all of them. And then you see kind of like the leadership or the minister pop in every once in a while. But it's basically centered on these 4, maybe a 5th person. And then those 4 people, obviously, they've got their own different recruits and they've got their own network and trying to infiltrate under different guises and so forth. So that's kind of the first 3 episodes. Like I said, if crime thrillers and this kind of like undercover sneaking about is your thing, it's actually pretty well done. It's pretty interesting. Very similar again to Department Q, which we saw, right? Like,
yeah.
It's people doing a little bit more with less and just being clever and creative and resourceful. There's no sex. There's not a lot of vulgarity that I can recall. Minimum violence in the sense that there's a few kind of like pistols being shot, but nothing like really gory, no like mutilations or stuff like that. So I've kind of enjoyed it, to be honest. That's, I think, all the positives, that it's well done and interesting. The downside is, to be honest, we've seen this before. It's not really new. Someone kind of going undercover and trying to get into the gang, and they've got to kind of prove themselves. And then they prove themselves, and now they're in, and they've got to manipulate the gang. But, oh, wait a second, they're starting to form a personal relationship with a gang member. And, right, I mean, we've kind of seen this before. So it's a little bit cliche in that way. And the second downside is that none of the characters are really that compelling. I mean, they've got backstories, but no one's backstory is like really that interesting. I mean, they were just working for customs, kind of unhappy with their life, capable of more. You know, some of them have kind of gritty upbringings, which makes them better placed to kind of be back on the streets again. So I would give this overall a mooch. Not at all sci-fi, not at all modern in the sense that there's no iPhone, there's no internet, there's no GPS, right? None of that plays into this. That is Legends, 6-episode series on Netflix. I give it a mooch.
Okay, great.
All right, Pete, pick me up today. What do you got?
All right, so I had a show that you, I think, watched a few episodes of. It's a show that should theoretically be near and dear to our hearts because it is a spin-off pseudo-prequel to For All Mankind on Apple TV+. This is Star City.
That's right. I have to say, I was not actually sure at the beginning if it was related because they're, as you'll describe, they're very, very different styles, right?
Yeah. As a quick recap, For All Mankind is a sci-fi show. It's the American perspective of what would have happened in history or what happened in this alternate history where the USSR sent a man to the moon first. Spoiler alert, it wasn't a man at all. It was actually a woman. That was the setup for All Mankind. Now we have Star City, which is, it starts off with us seeing that first scene of For All Mankind, but from the Russian side, where they send a woman to the moon. Star City is the Russian equivalent of Cape Canaveral. It's called Star City because it's basically where the space operations are. It stars Reese Ifans, who is the chief designer. I think his name is officially the chief designer, and he's basically like the guy who's in charge. He's the Ed Harris from Apollo 13, right? Like he leads the program, he kind of takes control of the systems, and he's the one who's like, okay, this person is going to be the pilot, this is going to be the cosmonaut. As much as he can, because of course, as you'd expect, it's Russia, so a lot of politics comes into play, and there's a lot of like, well, what's good for the country, not so much for the program, that kind of thing. So unlike For All Mankind, which really felt like a sci-fi show, this is a sci-fi show only in concept. It's not really a sci-fi show. It's a sci-fi show in the sense that they're talking about space and going to the moon. Yeah. But the reality is it's none of that. This is a real like Soviet era-esque espionage thriller.
Yeah.
This is like a proper spy thriller set in the 60s. It's got the drab Russian colors. It feels like you're in like this desolate part of Russia. And I mean, just as an aside, I made a note. I thought it was funny that it's obviously Russian, and like when we saw For All Mankind, everyone had very convincing Russian accents. Here, everyone's got a British accent for some reason. So it's really, I find it really funny.
They've definitely anglicized it quite a bit, right? Like, they don't even pretend to speak in Russian. Yeah.
100%. It's really cool. So now you've got 3 stories. The first story is effectively about the lady cosmonaut, who's the first one onto the moon. She really wants to go back into space, but she bungles things up because, instead of giving the pre-prepared speech that she was meant to from the moon, she gives like a speech where she talks about the past cosmonauts who got us there, and, she honors her teammates, and that puts her in trouble because she was supposed to honor Russia first.
Yeah.
The second storyline is about another female who works for, I guess, the equivalent of like an intelligence agency. And she works at a listening post. And she reports to like this general who is kind of like, the idea is that these people at the listening post are listening in on all the conversations and listening devices of all the cosmonauts. And so their goal is to kind of make sure that no one is saying anything or doing anything that's anti-Russian, anti-communist, anti-party, right? And so she's this young woman who's like ambitious, very well educated. She wants to prove herself. And so that's the second story. It's not a B plot, it's just a parallel story. And then the third story is the one that I think is the most interesting. It's about the chief designer or the chief engineer. He has ambitions for space. And his ambitions for space are to go beyond the moon. He wants to go to Venus and Mars and all the other planets. He wants to basically conquer the solar system. Whereas the Russian government, what they're interested in doing is setting up a military base on the moon. That is their immediate concern.
Yep.
And so what we see by the end of the second episode is in parallel to the official mission of Star City, which is to set up this lunar military base, the chief engineer is starting to recruit a small number of engineers and scientists to run a parallel mission of going beyond the moon in secret. And he's like, listen, if we get caught, we're likely going to get prisoned, if not killed. So this is really for people who believe in not Russian superiority, but mankind's ability to expand beyond the stars. Right? So those are the three stories that are running in parallel. And that one is, of course, a little bit more leans in towards the sci-fi element. But, of course, there's a lot of espionage thriller because he's doing this all under the guise of, well, yeah, we're going to set up a base on the moon. For me, this is a really, really incredibly good show. I think that, first of all, I think I've only watched 2 episodes, but I'm dying to watch the rest. I think as at the time of this recording, there are 7 episodes out. I think there are 8, if not 10, for this season. So I expect that, I'll be able to watch all 7 before the next one comes out. This is a thriller, like a proper thriller, like one that I haven't seen in a long time. What makes it interesting is that it's set exclusively in Russia, and it doesn't do the classic thing that you would expect some people would do, which would be to introduce the US CIA and to try to convert people and do that kind of, the US is great, the USSR is bad, that kind of thing. This is just 3 Russian stories about loosely tied around space, and it's fantastic. I really, really like it.
I'm really happy that you like it. I think you've done a very accurate job to describe kind of like the breakdown. There's a few more little B plots, as you know. I mean, there's a lot of small relationships between the 2 married couples, obviously, right? The 2 cosmonaut married couples. So those are maybe considered kind of B plots. And each of those 4 folks has kind of their own little issues and secret lives and private stuff. I mean, it's a very detailed, a little bit slow moving show where dramatic amount of detail, right? And dramatic amount of nuance into each kind of like character and storyline and stuff like that. I like the show. I don't think I like it as much as you, just because it is a little bit drab in terms of the colors. Like, I mean, it's filmed in color, but like no one is wearing anything that is colorful, right? Like everyone's kind of got like military green. Everyone's apartment is kind of like the same communist shade of cream or gray or whatever it is. And it's a little bit slow moving for me, but I do find overall the different like storylines to be a little bit compelling. The flip side is everyone's really sad, It's really interesting and maybe faithful to the old Soviet Union to show everybody just so unhappy. Even like the biggest of bosses has their own pressure and no one is really happy. You can kind of see how the system eventually exploded because it cannot just be constant surveillance and watching your back and not trusting anyone and not saying anything. Like, no one had a pressure release. And like on a day-to-day basis, it just seems so awful in terms of like the minutia, the scrutiny, the security, the questioning, the, are you an agent? Are you loyal? Are you, doing anything wrong? Like you said, there's a building that's dedicated to people just listening in to every single like person, right? And probably there's someone double checking those people and someone double checking the double checkers. And it's just like so many layers of redundancy. But the show is very good. And I think it pulls back a little bit from For All Mankind, which was getting a little bit soap opera-ish towards the end. This kind of pulls it back into let's not forget how this all started and how incredible it was just from a science perspective, to get humans into space, to land them and explain kind of like the backstory in terms of look how much work and dedication and preparation and training and practice and repetition, goes into those missions. Whereas For All Mankind was a little bit like, hey, you want to go to space? Okay, we're going tomorrow. Who should it be? Me or you? Or you want a pilot? Oh, he's been drunk for 6 months, but don't worry. He can pull it together and let's go. We fly tomorrow, kind of, a little bit more American cowboy image style, I think it's exceptionally made well. I would not at all be surprised if it took home a lot of awards. It's more mooch-ish for me, only because it's just a little bit dour, both in terms of color and in terms of it's not lighthearted. It's a serious sci-fi or espionage type show.
Right, exactly.
But I think you're going to give it a must subscribe, right?
Oh, this is definitely a must subscribe for me.
That's not commonplace this year, actually. I think maybe you've got 2 or 3 must subscribes. I'm probably at 2 as well, right?
Yeah, I've got 2. This one and Ponies. And Ponies, by the way, interestingly enough, was also set in Russia. And that's right. It was about an espionage thriller, so that's interesting.
That's right. Oh, you've got your type. Okay, what are the assignments for next week?
That's a good question. Next week, my friend, you are back on Apple TV after some time. You are watching a show from last year called The Last Frontier. I am on Netflix watching a very old show from 2011, Falling Skies.
All right, Pete, before we sign off for the day, can you remind everybody of what are the Films and Stuff social media?
All right. Like this video, leave a comment below, subscribe to our channel, and do not forget to hit that notification bell so that you know when the next episode of the Films and Stuff podcast drops for you.
Right you are. Pete, thank you for contributions today. Listeners, thank you as always for joining in. We will see everyone next week, next episode, Films and Stuff podcast. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ethan. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Films and Stuff. If you haven't already, please subscribe and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are downloaded. Films and Stuff. There is no substitute.